There are days when everything feels heavier than it should. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. You wake up, but the body does not follow. You move, but something inside stays still. Maybe it was just a small thing, a word someone said, a silence you didn't expect, or a moment that reminded you of something you tried to forget. And now you carry it with you, quietly, through the day, through every thought. Have you ever felt that? That kind of pain that doesn't shout, but lingers. The kind you cannot explain to anyone, because from the outside, everything looks fine. But inside, you are tired of holding it together, tired of pretending that nothing touches you, tired of being strong when no one sees the effort. And sometimes, you don't even want to fight it anymore. You just sit there, in silence, letting the weight settle deeper. I know that place, not as an idea, but as something lived, something endured, without words. Because life does not always test you with noise. Sometimes it tests you with quiet suffering, with days that feel empty, with nights that stretch too long, with thoughts that return again and again, and you begin to wonder, how much more can I take? How long do I keep going? Like this. You don't ask for answers. You don't expect relief. You just keep moving, slowly, silently. And yet, somewhere beneath all that weight, there is still something in you that refuses to break. Not strong, not loud, just still there. Maybe you've noticed it in the way you continue, in the way you endure one more moment. Even when you don't want to, there is something quiet about that. Something almost invisible, but real. And perhaps that quiet endurance is where everything begins, because pain does not always need to be defeated. Sometimes it needs to be carried differently. And in that shift, something inside you starts to change. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, like a breath returning after being held too long. Let's step into that silence together and see what remains when nothing else does. When someone hurts you, it rarely comes from nowhere. It may feel sudden, sharp, but beneath that moment, there is always a history you cannot see. People act from what they know, from what they have learned, from what they believe, even when those beliefs are broken. A harsh word often carries an old wound. A cold silence may come from fear, not indifference. We tend to take things personally. We hear a tone, we see a reaction, and the mind quickly says, "This is about me." But more often than not, it isn't. It is about them, about their habits of thinking, about the way they interpret the world, about the stories they have been telling themselves for years. Think of a tired parent who speaks too harshly after a long day. The child feels hurt, feels rejected, but the words were not born from hatred. They came from exhaustion, or a friend who suddenly becomes distant, stops replying, stops showing up. It feels like abandonment, but perhaps they are struggling in silence with something they don't know how to share. Even in society, you may meet people who judge quickly, who speak without understanding, who treat you as if they already decided who you are. And it stings because it feels unfair, because you know that is not your truth. But their judgment does not come from knowing you. It comes from their own lens, from their own limits. A person can only see as far as their awareness allows, no further. So when they misunderstand you, they are not measuring your worth. They are revealing the boundaries of their perception. And when they act poorly, it is not always a reflection of your value. It is often a reflection of their confusion. This does not excuse harm, it does not make pain disappear, but it changes where the meaning is placed. Instead of asking, "Why am I treated this way?" there is another way to look. What is happening inside them? That leads to this. Not to justify, not to agree, but to see more clearly, because clarity creates a small space, a space between what happens and what you feel. And in that space, something quiet becomes possible. You stop absorbing everything as a verdict about yourself. You begin to notice that not every action is a message about your worth. Some are simply expressions of someone else's inner world, their impatience, their fear, their unresolved pain. And when you see that, the weight shifts. Just slightly. You still feel hurt. Of course you do. You are human, but the pain is no longer mixed with confusion or self-doubt. It becomes simpler, cleaner, easier to hold, and maybe this is where a different kind of strength begins to form, not by controlling others, but by understanding what truly belongs to you and what does not. Still, even when you understand all this, even when you see clearly, even when you remind yourself that their actions are not your value, why does it still hurt? Why does the feeling remain long after the moment has passed? Even when the mind understands, the heart does not immediately follow. That is why pain stays. Not because you are weak, not because you failed to rise above it, but because being hurt is rarely about one moment alone. A wound is often deeper than the event that opened it. Sometimes a single word touches years of silence. Sometimes one rejection awakens every other rejection you thought had already passed. And so, what hurts you is not only what happened, it is also what it means to you, or what the mind believes it means. Perhaps you expected kindness, not perfection, just basic human warmth, a little care, a little honesty, a little understanding, and when that did not come, something in you collapsed, not loudly, but inwardly, because expectation is often quiet. It does not always announce itself. Sometimes it lives in the simplest hope that they would understand, that they would stay, that they would not treat you like something easy to dismiss. And when reality breaks that hope, pain enters, not only through what they did, but through the distance between what was and what you believed should have been. This is why two people can live through the same event and suffer in very different ways. The outer moment may look similar, but the inner attachment is not. One person loses a friend and feels sadness. Another loses a friend and feels their whole worth collapse. Why? Because the loss did not only take away a person, it took away a mirror, a place of recognition, a sense of being chosen. Many wounds are tied to this quiet hunger, the hunger to be seen, to be valued, to be told, in one form or another, you matter. And when that recognition does not come, or worse, when contempt comes instead, the pain can feel unbearable, because now it seems as if something essential has been denied. Not just affection, not just fairness, but your place, your significance, your human dignity. This is where suffering grows, not always from the event itself, but from the meaning the heart attaches to it. You wanted loyalty, you received distance. You wanted gentleness, you received judgment. You wanted honesty, you received avoidance. And the pain became larger because it touched desire, not shallow desire, a very human one, the desire to be met without having to beg for it. There is also attachment, not only to people, but to images, to roles, to the version of life you thought should unfold if you loved carefully enough, if you gave enough, if you endured enough. We become attached to how things should be, how others should behave, how relationships should remain, how respect should naturally be returned if we ourselves were sincere. But life does not move according to our inner script, and people do not always answer with the clarity we offer them. That is where the struggle sharpens, not just in loss, but in resistance to loss. A part of us keeps saying, "No, it should not have been this way." And perhaps that voice is understandable. Perhaps it even carries innocence, but it also keeps the wound open, because the mind returns again and again to the broken expectation, replaying the moment, rewriting the conversation, imagining a different ending. And each return becomes another small ache. This does not mean feeling is a mistake. It does not mean the Stoic path asks you to become cold, or unreachable, or made of stone. No, the pain is real. The trembling in the chest is real. The heaviness in the throat. The long silence after disappointment. The weariness that settles into the body. All of it is real. To deny that would not be wisdom. It would only be another mask. The deeper discipline is not to erase emotion. It is to keep emotion from becoming the ruler of your inner world, to feel fully, without surrendering your direction, to let sorrow pass through, without building a home inside it, to let anger speak, without letting it take the wheel. This is difficult, especially at night. Especially in those quiet hours when memory becomes louder than truth. Because emotion is persuasive, it tells you that what you feel now is the whole reality, that this hurt defines the story, that this moment explains your worth. But perhaps emotion, when left alone in the dark, does not simply reveal pain. Perhaps it enlarges it. And that is why inner suffering can become so deep. Not because the heart feels, but because the feeling is allowed to become identity. You were hurt, and slowly, without noticing, the mind begins to say, "I am unwanted. I am forgettable. I am not enough." That is where pain changes form. It is no longer an experience. It becomes a conclusion. And once pain becomes a conclusion, the soul grows tired in a different way, quieter, heavier, more hidden. So perhaps the true struggle is not only with what others did, but with what the wound tries to make you believe about yourself. And maybe before anything can be healed, that belief must first be seen in the stillness, before we speak of endurance, or composure, or strength. We may need to sit for a moment with the silent machinery of pain, and watch how it moves. There is a quiet moment, just before pain becomes reaction. It is small, so small that most people never notice it. A look, a word, a cold reply. Then the body tightens, the chest grows warm, the mind begins to move, and, from there, everything can happen very quickly. A defensive answer, a long inner argument, a silence filled with resentment. But the Stoic way does not begin by trying to change the other person. It begins by noticing that first movement within yourself. Imagine this. Someone in your family speaks to you with a tone that feels sharp, nothing dramatic, just enough to leave a mark. In another time, you might have answered at once. You might have tried to correct them, to prove your intention, to make them understand that their words were unfair. But now, something different happens. You still feel the sting. You do not deny it. Yet before speaking, you let one breath arrive fully, not as a trick, not as performance, just one quiet pause to keep the wound from choosing your next sentence. This is a simple practice, but it changes much, because the first task is not to win the moment, it is to remain present inside it. A calm mind does not always appear naturally. Sometimes it is built in these brief pauses, again and again. There is another kind of practice. It appears when the mind keeps returning to what someone did. You replay the scene, their face, their words, your silence, and with each return, the pain feels renewed. Here the Stoic spirit gently asks a different question. What in this moment belongs to my care, and what does not? Their tone? No. Their character? No. Their past? No. Your own judgment, your next action, the shape of your inner response. Yes, this is not detachment in a cold sense. It is a way of placing your strength where it can actually live. Think of a friend who misunderstands you. You explain yourself once, perhaps twice, but they continue to see only their version. At some point, the heart grows tired from trying to enter a door that will not open. And so another Stoic principle begins to matter. Do not spend your peace trying to manage another person's mind. You can be honest, you can be measured, you can be sincere, but you cannot force recognition. There is relief in seeing this clearly, because so much suffering comes from the hidden labor of trying to control what was never yours to carry. Sometimes the practice looks even simpler. A message remains unanswered. A colleague grows distant. Someone in society speaks with unnecessary judgment. The old instinct says, do something now. Fix it. Defend yourself. Push back. But inner steadiness sometimes chooses a quieter form of strength, not withdrawal, not passivity, just restraint with self-respect still intact. You do not chase every impression. You do not answer every small injury as if it were a final truth. You let some things show their true size by not enlarging them. This too is a discipline. A person at work may overlook your effort, another may receive the praise, and for a moment the mind starts building its case. This is unfair. I gave more. I deserve to be seen. Perhaps all of that is true, but if the whole day is then handed over to bitterness, something precious is lost. So the Stoic response is not to pretend the moment did not matter. It is to ask, will I let this pass through me with dignity? Or will I keep feeding it until it becomes the center of my inner life? That question does not remove disappointment, but it keeps disappointment from becoming identity. There is also the practice of returning to facts. Pain often speaks in enlargements. They ignored me, so I must not matter. They were cold today, so everything has changed. But reality is often smaller and more precise than the story emotion creates. A person was unkind. That is the fact. From there, the mind may add many unnecessary conclusions. The Stoic habit is to stay near what is real, close to the event, not lost in the meanings fear begins to invent. This makes the mind steadier, not because life becomes softer, but because perception becomes cleaner. And then there is one more practice, a quiet one, perhaps the most human of all. When hurt arrives, instead of asking only, how do I get rid of this feeling? Another question appears. How can I carry this without leaving myself? That question changes the atmosphere. Now the goal is no longer suppression, no longer revenge, no longer perfect control. It is companionship with your own mind, a steadier hand inside your own experience. You begin to live as someone who can be hurt and still remain whole, someone who can feel disappointment and still speak carefully, someone who can meet coldness without becoming cold inside. This is not achieved in one great moment. It is formed in ordinary scenes. At the dinner table, in a hallway at work, in a delayed reply. In the silence after being misunderstood, little by little, you stop asking life to stop testing you and begin learning how to stand within the test with less inner friction. Not hard, not numb, just quieter, more anchored, more your own. And from there, the wound may still exist, but it no longer fills the whole sky. There is space again, breath again, a softer kind of clarity. And in that clarity, the heart feels lighter than it did before. There comes a point in life when winning no longer feels like peace. You may still prove your point. You may still speak the sharper word. You may still walk away knowing you were right. And yet, something inside remains restless, because being right is not always the same as being free. Many people spend years trying to win invisible battles. A final reply, a better image, a moment of recognition, a chance to make someone regret how they once treated them. From the outside, it can look like strength, composed, certain, untouched, but inwardly, it is often another form of dependence, because your peace still waits on another person's defeat, and anything that depends on another mind is fragile. This is why the Stoic spirit does not hunger for conquest, not because it is passive, not because it is afraid, but because it has seen how exhausting it is to keep tying the soul to every contest. To win over someone usually means to change their position, to silence their argument, to expose their weakness, to stand above them for a brief moment and call it resolution. But what kind of resolution is that? If the mind must keep returning to the scene to feel whole, what kind of victory still needs witnesses? Still needs comparison? Still needs the quiet satisfaction of seeing another person made smaller? That is not freedom. That is only tension wearing the clothes of triumph. There is another kind of winning that does not look dramatic. No applause, no reversal, no final sentence that leaves the other person speechless. Only this: you remain inwardly undisturbed by what once would have ruled you. You leave the moment without carrying it for days. You do not rehearse it at night. You do not build a second life inside your mind where you finally say what you wish you had said. You simply continue with your clarity still intact. That is quieter, but far more rare. To defeat another person may require force, timing, skill, pride. To keep your own mind from becoming bitter, that requires something deeper, because the harder task is not defeating what stands before you. It is refusing to become inwardly shaped by every conflict that crosses your path. Some people win arguments and lose their sleep, win status and lose simplicity, win attention and lose themselves. Their outer life rises, but inwardly, they are still crowded, still reacting, still tied to the judgment of others as tightly as before. The Stoic way looks at this with a kind of quiet sadness, because it knows how easily the ego mistakes movement for meaning. It says, if I can make them admit I was right, then I will be at peace. If I can show them what they lost, then I will be free. If I can rise higher than them, then the wound will close. But peace does not come that way, because the wound that depends on comparison never fully ends. It only changes shape. Today it wants revenge. Tomorrow it wants admiration. After that, it wants proof that it was never small to begin with. And so the chase continues, quietly, endlessly. But the mature soul begins to see something else. Not every battle deserves an answer. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not insult insult requires reply. There is a dignity in no longer needing to stand in every fire just to show that you can survive it. Sometimes the clearest sign of inner strength is the absence of struggle where struggle once would have been. Someone misjudges you, and you let the judgment remain theirs. Someone competes with you in silence, and you do not enter the race. Someone hopes to disturb your balance, and finds nothing to hold on to. This is not weakness, it is release. Because to protect your peace is not to retreat from life. It is to stop handing your center to every passing hand. There is a vast difference between standing above someone and standing within yourself. The first is unstable. The second endures. When you try to win over others, your position is always at risk. Someone stronger appears, someone louder, someone more admired. And now the mind must defend what it built. But when your aim is inner steadiness, there is nothing to defend in that old way. No throne, no performance, no audience needed. Only a simpler question. Did I keep my mind clear? Did I remain aligned with what I know is right? Did I leave this moment without abandoning myself? This is the kind of victory that cannot be taken from you by opinion, or rumor, or misunderstanding. It belongs to a place deeper than reputation, a place where the soul is no longer bargaining for permission to be at rest. And that rest feels almost unfamiliar at first, because many people have lived so long inside tension that peace feels empty, too plain, too quiet. But over time, that quiet becomes beautiful. You stop measuring your worth by who noticed you. You stop seeking closure from those who cannot offer it. You stop returning to closed doors just to knock one more time. And slowly, a larger space opens within. Not dramatic, not sudden, just clear, like setting down a weight you had forgotten you were carrying. Then one day, without ceremony, you realize you are no longer trying to win, not because life defeated you, but because you finally saw that peace was never waiting at the end of conquest. It was waiting in the moment. You no longer needed to follow every conflict to its last corner. And so you keep walking, not in retreat, not in sorrow, but with the calm of someone who has learned that the truest departure is sometimes silent, like a long road at dusk, holding the last gold of the evening, while one figure moves forward without looking back. There is a kind of quiet that only comes after many storms, not because life has become gentle, but because something inside you has stopped resisting every wave. You begin to see that not everything was meant to be held, not every word was meant to stay, not every moment was meant to define you. There was a time when everything felt personal, every silence, every change in tone, every absence that had no explanation, and slowly, those moments built a world inside you, a world of questions, of interpretations, of quiet conclusions you never spoke aloud. But over time, something softened. Not the world, you. You stopped asking for perfect understanding, stopped waiting for every action to make sense, stopped needing every feeling to be resolved immediately. You began to notice how much of your suffering was not in the event itself, but in the weight you gave to it. How a single moment could stretch into many nights, simply because the mind refused to set it down. And then, almost quietly, you learned to loosen your grip. Not all at once, not as a decision, but as a gradual shift, a quiet understanding that you could carry less and still remain whole. You still feel. Of course you do. Nothing has been removed from your humanity. You still notice when something is off, still recognize when something hurts, still pause when something lingers. But now, there is space between you and what you feel, a space that was not there before, a space that does not rush to react, does not rush to conclude. In that space, things pass differently. Pain arrives and leaves more gently. Disappointment comes, but does not stay as long. Even anger loses its urgency because you no longer treat every emotion as a command. You listen, but you do not obey without question. And in that quiet discipline, something rare begins to grow. A steadiness that does not depend on the behavior of others. You are no longer waiting for the world to become fair before you can rest. You are no longer waiting for people to become consistent before you can feel at ease. You begin to rest in something simpler, your own clarity, your own restraint, your own way of meeting each moment without losing yourself. This does not make life perfect. There are still days that feel heavier than they should, still moments that return without invitation, but they no longer take everything with them. Because now, you know how to remain even when something hurts. You know how to let a moment be only a moment, not a sentence, not a story about who you are. And perhaps that is enough. Not the kind of enough that answers every question, but the kind that allows you to stop asking so urgently, to sit, to breathe, to continue without needing to resolve everything at once. There is a quiet dignity in that, a quiet strength that does not show itself in noise, only in the way you carry your own mind. And maybe, in the end, nothing dramatic changes, no final victory, no clear conclusion, only this: you walk through life a little lighter, a little clearer, a little less entangled in what was never yours to hold. And when the next storm comes, as it always does, you do not ask why it is here. You simply stand and let it pass through a quieter sky, because now you know not everything that touches you is meant to stay, and not everything you feel is who you are. In the end, nothing needed to be won. Nothing needed to be fixed, only seen and gently released. And somewhere in that stillness, you remain.